I want to welcome first onto the program Dr. Stephen Kirby. He's earned a PhD in Foreign Affairs with an emphasis on Soviet foreign policy. He's the author of Letting Islam Be Islam, Separating Truth from Myth, and is a frequent presenter on the Koran and associated doctrine. Please welcome first up this evening, Dr. Stephen Kirby.
It's great to be here. I'd like to thank the Global Faith Institute folks, the folks here at the church for putting this on. It's quite an honor to be a part of this. Is a tri-faith initiative possible? That's a question a lot of people have on their minds, and it deserves an answer. So let's begin by seeing what the Tri-Faith Initiative wants to be. This is from the Tri-Faith Initiative website. Here's what they say: accepting each other's religious expression brings us together as a community and creates a voice for a hopeful future. The Tri-Faith Initiative of Omaha, Nebraska is meeting this challenge. Members of the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are committed to promote mutual respect and uphold the right to proclaim one's own religion and serve God in his/her own way. But the Tri-Faith Initiative is also a journey that's based on mutual understanding, respect, basically understanding, respect, and acceptance. And that's from Dr. Naser Alsharif. And then there's statements from another Muslim involved with the Tri-Faith Initiative. We are an independent Omaha group whose primary goal is to present Islam as what it really is. That, he said, means a religion that promotes peaceful coexistence. Dr. Saeed Moeddin, Omaha World Herald article back in June. So we're talking about Islam promoting peaceful coexistence, mutual respect, understanding of the other two religions. So what does Islam teach about Judaism and Christianity? We're going to start off looking at the Quran. The Quran consists of the perfect, unchangeable, timeless words of Allah revealed to Muhammad over a period of about 23 years. We're going to start off with the first chapter of the Quran, Al-Fatihah. Muhammad said that was the greatest chapter in the Quran. Any prayer that did not include Al-Fatihah was invalid. So it's included in each cycle of the 5 daily obligatory prayers and in other Muslim prayers. Now, Al-Fatihah consists of only 7 verses. There we have them right there. A couple of side notes. You'll notice verse 2, 4, for example, you'll see words in parentheses. Those words have been thrown in there by the translator to help us understand the meaning of the verse and the meaning of some of the terminology. The verses of the Quran that we're going to be looking at are from the Noble Quran, published by Darul Salam Publishers in Saudi Arabia. And as I say at all my presentations, if anybody thinks that this translation of the Quran, the Noble Quran, is a bad translation that is misconstruing the meaning of a verse, please let me know, because I'll get your contact information. And then I will personally contact Darul Salam Publishers to let them know that you think they're putting out a bad translation of the Quran. And we'll see what we can get worked out. So anyway, let's go. Let's look at the last 2 verses. This is what we're looking at. Guide us to the straight way, number 6. Number 7, the way of those on whom you have bestowed your grace, not the way of those who earned your anger, nor of those who went astray. So how are we going to understand what these 2 verses mean? We're going to do what Muslims have done for over 1,000 years. We're going to be looking at the tafsirs and the hadiths. Tafsirs are the commentaries on the Quran explaining the meanings and context of verses in the Quran. The tafsirs rely heavily on the hadiths. Reports about the examples, ways, and teachings of Muhammad believed to have come from those who were with him and observed and heard them. So let's apply these to the last 2 verses. Verse number 6, guide us to the straight way. What the heck is the straight way? What are Muslims asking for? Guide to the straight way. The straight way is Islam. And how do we know that? For example, an authoritative tafsir, Tafsir Ibn Kathir, written in the 14th century, explains that the straight way is Islam. We're going to be using two 20th century tafsirs too, so you can see some continuity in thought and interpretation. Here's our two 20th century tafsirs. There we go. Tafsir Asadi was written in the early 1900s. Tafsir Hasan al-Bayan, which was first published in 1995. You can go to all three of these tafsirs, and they explain that the straight way is Islam. So this shows the importance of relying on the tafsirs, the Quran commentaries, if you want to understand the verses of the Quran. Now, verse 7 talks about not the way of those who earned your anger. So Muslims are praying, don't let us follow the way of those who've earned your anger. Who's earned the anger of Allah? Muhammad said the Jews had earned Allah's anger. And how do we know that? Muhammad said the Jews had earned Allah's anger. These are authoritative sources from the 9th century through the 20th century. The first two, Sahih al-Bukhari, Jami' at-Tirmidhi, are hadith collections. Then we've got the two tafsirs. We've got the Noble Quran, which we're using in this presentation. The Sealed Nectar, in 1979, won an award for first place in international competition for a new biography of Muhammad. It was put on by the Muslim World League. So we have these authoritative sources, just an example of the authoritative sources covering this time period, saying that Muhammad said the Jews had earned Allah's anger. The other part of verse 7, nor of those who went astray. Who's gone astray? What did Muhammad say? Muhammad said the Christians had gone astray. And how do we know that? Once again, our authoritative sources. So you can see how important it is to rely on the authoritative sources of Islam if you want to understand Islam. So the message of these last two verses of Al-Fatihah can best be summed up in the modern Tafsir Hasan al-Bayan. Here's what the modern tafsir had to say. Hence, those who want to follow the straight way should avoid the errors of both Jews and Christians. The Jews, because they deliberately followed the wrong way, tampered with the verses of their book, played tricks, called Prophet Ezra, a son of God, and gave their rabbis the authority to prohibit or permit. And the Christians, because they elevated Isa, Jesus, to the level of Son of God and the third of three. So when it comes to Judaism and Christianity, when Muslims repeat Al-Fatihah, it reinforces differences, criticizes Judaism and Christianity multiple times a day. What else does the Quran say about Jews and Christians? Let's take a look at chapter 5, verse 51 of the Quran. O you who believe, take not the Jews and the Christians as awliya, friends, protectors, helpers. They are but awliya of each other. And if any amongst you takes them as awliya, then surely he is one of them. Verily, Allah guides not those people who are the zalimun, polytheists, wrongdoers, unjust, basically non-Muslims. This verse is a command from Allah to the Muslims. Don't take the Jews and Christians as friends. You can't get much more clear-cut about this. But let's look at the tafsirs if there's any questions about this. Let's see what the Tafsir Ibn Kathir had to say about this. Under a section titled, The Prohibition of Taking the Jews, Christians, and Enemies of Islam as Friends. Here's what Ibn Kathir wrote. Allah forbids his believing servants from having Jews and Christians as friends because they are the enemies of Islam and its people. May Allah curse them. We've got a 10th century tafsir. Ibn Abbas stated the Muslims who take Jews and Christians as friends are not included in Allah's protection and safety. 15th century tafsir al-Jalalain explained this verse meant Muslims were not to join Jews and Christians in mutual friendship and love or in their unbelief. Now you could say, well, these were written centuries ago. Has there been any change? That's why we have our two 20th century tafsirs. Let's look at the first tafsir from the 20th century, Tafsir Asadi. Allah, while describing to his believing servants the ignorant condition and unethical demeanor of the Jews and the Christians, orders them not to maintain alliance with them. They are your enemies. Written in the early 1900s. How about Tafsir Hasan al-Bayan? The verse forbids Muslims to keep intimate relations with them and take them as protectors and helpers because they are the enemies of Allah, the Muslims, and Islam. So here we have 5 authoritative tafsirs written between around 900 and 1995. These authoritative tafsirs say this verse commands Muslims not to be friends with Jews and Christians. And what's interesting on this In explaining this verse, 3 of the 5 tafsirs, including the 2 written in the 20th century, refer to Jews and Christians as enemies of Islam. So if Jews and Christians are enemies of Islam, how can Muslims be friends with Jews and Christians? How can you have a tri-faith movement? Here's an answer for you right here, another verse from the Quran. Chapter 3, verse 28. Let not the believers take the disbelievers as awliya, supporters, helpers, instead of the believers. And whoever does that will never be helped by Allah in any way, except if you indeed fear a danger from them. And Allah warns you against himself, his punishment. And to Allah is the final return. Now think about this. Here we have another verse. Words of Allah commanding Muslims, don't be friends with Jews and Christians. And actually, this is a little more general. Don't be friends with non-Muslims, period. But you notice it says except. So there's an exception in this verse. And that's the key to this verse right here. Let's look at what Ibn Kathir had to say. And he explained the exception on this. Allah prohibited his believing servants from becoming supporters of the disbelievers or to take them as comrades with whom they develop friendships rather than the believers, except those believers who in some areas or time fear for their safety from the disbelievers. In this case, such believers are allowed to show friendship to the disbelievers outwardly, but never inwardly. Stay true in your heart to Islam. For instance, Al-Bukhari recorded that Abu Darda said, "We smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them." Our 15th century tafsir al-Jalalain explained the exception here. Unless it is dissimulation out of fear of them so that the befriending takes place with the tongue alone and not the heart. This was before Islam became mighty, when Islam had no power in the land. Any change over the centuries? Let's look at our first 20th century tafsir. Allah prohibits the believers from entering into friendship with the disbelievers, or to have love for them, aid them, or seek their help in any task meant for the Muslims. If you fear for your life, then you can verbally express friendship with them and say things or commit actions in a manner that might save your life, so you can pretend to be friends. Our other modern tafsir. In this verse, Allah has strictly forbidden the believers to make friends with disbelievers. Believers are Muslims, disbelievers are non-Muslims, because the latter are the enemies of Allah as well as enemies of the believers. Hence, there is no reason to make friends with them. There are many verses in the Quran warning believers against making friends with disbelievers, except for reasons of expediency or need or trade. Now we talk about the exception here. The exception allowing friendship. This permission is for those Muslims who live in a non-Muslim state. If they fear repression, they may profess friendship with the non-Muslims verbally. So you can see nothing's changed. We started out with the 14th century Ibn Kathir to the 20th century. They're in agreement. You can pretend to be friends with non-Muslims. So what do Muslims in the tri-faith movement do about 551 and the similar verses that prohibit them from being friends with non-Muslims? Well, they have an option. They might just decide to follow the exception allowed in 328 and pretend to be friends. Or there's another option. They might just decide to deny certain verses of the Quran. But Muhammad warned about that. Here's what Muhammad said. It was narrated from Ibn Abbas that the messenger of Allah said, "Whoever denies a verse of the Quran, it is permissible to strike his neck," executing. So Muhammad said, if you deny a verse of the Quran, you can be killed. Now, there's a third option. See what the third option is. They might just use their own personal opinion in interpreting the timeless commands of Allah. Reasonable option, except Muhammad warned against this too. Muhammad bin Jarir reported that Ibn Abbas said that the Prophet said, "Whoever explains the Quran with his opinion or with what he has no knowledge of, then let him assume his seat in the fire." So basically what's Muhammad saying here, don't use your own opinion, go to the tafsirs, the authoritative sources. Because if you try to interpret the Quran based on your own opinion, you'll burn in the fires of hell. So this creates a dilemma. We had three options. Two of them Muhammad warned against. So the way it looks is, according to Islamic doctrine, the only way Muslims can be friends with non-Muslims is to pretend to be friends with non-Muslims. Who are among the worst enemies of Islam? Chapter 5, verse 82. Verily you will find the strongest among men in enmity to the believers, the Muslims, the Jews. The Jews are among the worst enemies of Islam. This is the words of Allah. Who are among the worst of creatures? 98.6. Verily those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, the Quran, and Prophet Muhammad, from among the people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians and al-mushrikun, will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures. So what al-mushrikun are non-Muslims in general. So what this verse says is Jews, Christians, non-Muslims in general are among the worst of creatures. In fact, it's interesting because Allah curses both the Jews and Christians. In the next verse of the Quran, chapter 9, verse 30, and the Jews say, Uzair, Ezra is the son of Allah, and the Christians say, Messiah is the son of Allah. That is their saying with their mouths, resembling the saying of those who disbelieved aforetime. Allah's curse be on them, how they are deluded away from the truth. Now, what's interesting, according to the Quran, and this would be a surprise for Jews, the Quran teaches that Jews believe that God had a son. So the Jews join Christians in believing God had a son, except the Christians say Jesus is the son of God, but according to the Quran, the Jews say Ezra, the prophet Ezra, is the son of God, which is surprising for a lot of Jews. But nevertheless, this verse right here, Allah curses both the Jews and Christians. Now, we're looking at chapter 9 of the Quran, and this brings us to a very important concept. Actually, it's a fundamental concept in understanding Islam, and it's the doctrine of abrogation. What the doctrine says, if there's a conflict between the meanings of two revelations in the Quran, then the most recent revelation is the one to be followed. Here's how it works. Muhammad started receiving the revelations from Allah in 610 when he was in Mecca. 622, the Muslims immigrated to Medina, and Muhammad continued to receive revelations. He got a lot of revelations in Mecca, went to Medina, continued to receive revelations up until his death. Now, over a period of 22, 23 years, there began to be a certain amount of mixed messaging going on, where there's really a conflict between verses of the Quran. So this concept of the doctrine of abrogation came about. And basically what it boils down to is Medina supersedes Mecca. That means if there's a conflict between two verses of the Quran, if it's a verse revealed in Mecca and a verse revealed in Medina, the verse revealed in Medina supersedes, it abrogates the first verse. And that's important to remember because a lot of people say, well, what about the peaceful verses in the Quran? My response is, where were they revealed? Mecca or Medina? And the verse, chapter 2, verse 106, a verse revealed in Medina, is the basis for abrogation. And this is how Allah explained it. Whatever verse, revelation do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or similar to it. Know you not that Allah is able to do all things. So this is the doctrine of abrogation, fundamental to understanding Islamic doctrine. So why is it so important to consider right now? The last verse we looked at before this was from chapter 9. Chapter 9, verse 30, that's where Allah curses the Jews and Christians. Chapter 9 is considered to be the last verse, last complete chapter revealed to Muhammad, chapter 9. So with the doctrine of abrogation, this means that all of Allah's statements in chapter 9 are the final word on the topics covered in chapter 9 of the Quran. So we saw, chapter 9, verse 30, Allah curses the Jews and Christians. It's the final word on that matter right there. Well, let's see what else chapter 9 has to say, especially when it comes to dealing with non-Muslims and, in particular, Jews and Christians. So let's look at a verse. This is, Islamic scholars refer to this as the verse of the sword. And you'll see why they refer to it as the verse of the sword. 9:5. Then when the sacred months have passed, then kill the mushrikun wherever you find them, and capture them and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every ambush. But if they repent by rejecting shirk, polytheism, and accept Islamic monotheism, and perform as-salat, the prayers, and give zakat, obligatory charity, then leave their way free. Verily, Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. There's two parts to this verse of the Quran right here. First 3.5 lines command Muslims to kill non-Muslims, mushrikun, non-Muslims, wherever you find them, and capture them, and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every ambush. Now remember, these are timeless commands from Allah. There's no cap on this. He didn't say, okay, by the end of the 8th century, this verse isn't relevant anymore. This verse is as relevant for Islamic doctrine as it was in the 7th century when it was revealed to Muhammad. The only way the non-Muslims can save themselves is, as they point out in the last few lines, convert to Islam. So what this verse says is, Muslims kill the non-Muslims. The only way the non-Muslims can survive is to either convert to Islam or die. But there was a later verse revealed that provided a third option for Jews and Christians in particular. And that would be chapter 9, verse 29. Fight against those who believe not in Allah nor in the last day, nor forbid that which has been forbidden by Allah and his messenger Muhammad, and those who acknowledge not the religion of truth, that is Islam, among the people of the scripture, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So this verse commands Muslims to fight against the Jews and Christians, but the Jews and Christians have a third option. Instead of converting or fighting to the death, they can pay the jizya. And what's the jizya? The jizya, it's a tax imposed on non-Muslims living under a Muslim government. It's basically protection money. It's what they're paying the Muslim government. But Jews and Christians don't just pay the jizya. They pay it with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So it's not like you just walk down and plunk down the money. You have to feel submissive and feel yourself subdued when you pay this. But this is the third option that's allowed in terms of Jews and Christians. And our modern tafsir Hasan al-Bayan, the latest tafsir we had, summarized this verse pretty good. The command to fight the pagans was already given. Now Allah commands the believers to fight the Jews and Christians if they do not accept Islam, until they pay the jizya and live under the rule of the Muslims. So the Quran's quite clear about this. Muslims are to fight non-Muslims. They're to fight Christians and Jews. Not a lot of peaceful coexistence going on right here. But also there's a lesson we can learn from this doctrine of abrogation. I call this the lesson of abrogation. Abu Ubaidah said every ayat, a verse, which obviates fighting is Meccan and abrogated by the command to fight. What this says is every peaceful verse, every verse that obviates fighting says, no, you can't fight. Every peaceful verse was revealed in Mecca, and it's been abrogated by the command to fight. So keep this in mind when we're talking about peaceful coexistence and understanding. What did Muhammad say about Jews and Christians? This would be interesting. Abu Hurairah reported that Allah's messenger, may peace be upon him, had said, do not greet the Jews and Christians before they greet you. And when you meet any one of them on the roads, force him to go to the narrowest part of it. Or Muhammad had this to say. Narrated Abu Hurairah, Allah's messenger said, the hour will not be established until you fight against the Jews. And the stone behind which a Jew will be hiding will say, O Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, so kill him. Now, there are actually some Muslims who say this isn't a valid verse. It's not authentic. Sahih al-Bukhari is the most authentic collection of hadiths in Islam. If it's in Sahih al-Bukhari, it's Islam, period. So keep that in mind if you ever have somebody trying to say, no, this verse isn't any good, it's not a valid verse. Sahih al-Bukhari. Muslims are commanded to fight against the Jews. Jew will be behind a stone. The stone will call out, O Muslim, come and kill this guy. All right. Muhammad also said that Jews and Christians would take the place of Muslims in hell. Abu Burda reported on the authority of his father that Allah's apostle, may peace be upon him, said, no Muslim would die, but Allah would admit instead of him a Jew or a Christian in hellfire. And on his deathbed, Muhammad had this to say. It was narrated by Umar bin al-Khattab that he heard the messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, saying, "I will expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslims." Wonder why you don't see any Christian churches or Jewish synagogues in Saudi Arabia? Right here. What does Islam teach about Jesus? Islam teaches that Jesus was only one of the prophets. And the Quran specifically says Jesus was not crucified. And we'll have the verse up there in just a second. Now, the way this worked, don't advance it yet, the way this worked was Jesus and his disciples were in a house, and the house was surrounded by an angry mob of Jews. They wanted to kill Jesus. So Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Who will take my place?" And a young disciple raised his hand. Jesus goes, "No, no, no, not you." And Jesus kept asking, and it was the same young disciple that kept raising his hand. So finally Jesus says, "Okay, you'll take my place." So then, we'll move along here. The ceiling opened, and Jesus was taken up into heaven. Allah made the disciple look like Jesus, and then it was that disciple who was crucified, which means that Islam teaches that the resurrection is a myth. Now, don't advance it yet. A couple of other issues to think about on this. Muslims who know their religion look at a crucifix or a painting of the crucifixion and see an imposter hanging up on the cross. Something else to think about. Since Jesus' disciples were in the house and they knew that it was an imposter that was crucified, this means that they went out, preached Christianity, knowing that it was a false religion based on a fraud. I'm not quite sure how much understanding we have here in terms of interfaith dialogue. But there is a common belief. That belief is Muslims and Christians both believe Jesus will return to earth. Except here's how Muhammad described it. He, Jesus, will descend while wearing 2 long, light yellow garments. His head appears to be dripping water even though no moisture touched it. He will break the cross, kill the pig, and banish the jizya and will call the people to Islam. During his time, Allah will destroy all religions except Islam. Isa, Jesus, will remain for 40 years and then will die, and Muslims will offer the funeral prayer for him. So let's look at this. Muhammad says Jesus is going to return to earth. Well, what's he going to do? Jesus is going to break the cross. Jesus returns to earth to destroy Christianity and to call all people to Islam. During the 40 years Jesus will be on earth, Allah will destroy all religions except Islam. And interestingly enough, according to Muhammad, Jesus will rule by the law of the Quran. Here's what Muhammad had to say about this. Narrated Abu Huraira, Allah's messenger said, "How will you be when the son of Maryam," Mary, meaning Jesus, "descends amongst you, and he will judge people by the law of the Quran and not by the law of the gospel?" One of our modern tafsirs summed this up quite well in this explanation. Muslims believe unanimously that Isa, Jesus, is alive in al-Barzakh, that he descends to earth before the day of resurrection, that he will kill the Dajjal, the false Messiah, and wipe out all of the religions except Islam. Al-Barzakh is the interval between death and resurrection. But what we're talking about here is Muslims and Christians both believe Jesus will return to earth. Muslims believe that when Jesus returns to earth, he will return to destroy Christianity and all other religions except Islam. And Jesus will rule by the law of the Quran, not the law of the gospel. So we don't see a lot of respect and mutual understanding here. And I'm not even sure there's much peaceful coexistence being taught. Consider what Muhammad said. Muhammad said, "By the one in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad, anyone, be he a Jew or Christian, who hears about me and does not believe in my mission, will, upon his death, be among the dwellers of the fire." Muhammad spoke for Allah. What Muhammad said, Allah said. So what Muhammad is saying, Jews and Christians are going to go to hell because they don't believe in Muhammad. They're not Muslims. So this raises an interesting question here. Which version of Islam for the Tri-Faith Initiative? That found in the Quran, the teachings of Muhammad, or a new, respectful, understanding, peaceful version created by local Muslims? So while you're pondering that, think about this. The Quran says Islam was perfected during the time of Muhammad. The Quran cannot be changed, and those are the verses right there if you want to look them up. Next, once Allah and Muhammad have decided a matter, Muslims cannot disagree with it. Whoever opposes Allah and Muhammad will be in the fires of hell. And Muhammad said, the most truthful speech is Allah's speech, and the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad. The worst matters are the newly invented in religion. Every newly invented matter is an innovation, and every innovation is a heresy, and every heresy is in the fire. So the only Islam is the Islam of the Quran and Muhammad. So back to our original question. Is the Tri-Faith Initiative possible? No. Because the Islam of the Quran and Muhammad is not compatible with the idea of a Tri-Faith Initiative. Thank you.
Dr. Naser Al-Sharif is an American Muslim of Palestinian ancestry. He is a professor of pharmacy sciences at Creighton University and is the director of Middle East Cultural and Educational Services. He spent the last 25 years educating people about Arab and Muslim culture, and he spent the last several years pretending to be my friend on News Radio 1110 KFAB. Please welcome Dr. Naser Al-Sharif.
Thank you, Scott. Well, where should I start? Wow. You know, I was hoping when I read the title of this flyer, Building Bridges Towards Peace, that this is what is this truly about. Now here I am faced with all of this, and I'm supposed to defend what? 1.8 billion Muslims. God forbid if they're all terrorists, you better run. You know? It's very unfortunate. You guys can't hear me? Oh, I'm sorry. Whew. Did you hear what I just said? Do I need to repeat it? No? Because that was important. Really, I was hoping and I was praying that this will be about building bridges to peace. Not based on misconceptions, not based on stereotypes, not based on mistrusting 1.8 billion people. And when we talk about Islamophobia, yes, we have some extreme Muslim terrorists out there, trust me. There is no doubt about that. But when that is mixed with what Islam is, that's where we all as Muslims hurt. And that when it's really painful, very painful. That's when it's painful for my child to sit here and listen to quotations from the Quran from whom? Somebody who's a Christian trying to interpret that or Quran and then say, well, you know what, it's based on tafsir. But they don't recognize that, you know what, Islamic jurisprudence is not a simple thing. In fact, as a scientist, Islamic jurisprudence, it is one of the best scientific methodology to really address any issue, economical, political, social, marriage, whatever you want to call it. But then we're faced here with somebody that can pick and choose and then claim that's what Islam ideology is, or God forbid, that's 1.8 billion Muslims believe in. You know, I could go on with this like this, and I usually do my presentations like this, but I think it's really critical to go through my slides because there's a lot of issues that have been discussed here, and I want to be very careful in terms of addressing this. Not that I want to speak for all Muslims, but I think it's really critical to address some of these issues. So I do apologize that I have to refer to my notes and PowerPoint, but I want to do that. Sadly enough, I didn't bring any gifts. My wife is here. She's the best cook. And if I brought her baklava, you guys would all be Muslims, I'll tell you that. No doubt about it. Anyway, so let me refer to my PowerPoints. We as Muslims, when we greet people, we say, in the name of God, the compassionate and merciful. Well, guess what? It's the same God that Christians and Jews believe in. We call it Allah. In fact, Christian Muslims, when they pray to Allah, believe it or not. No. Oh, no. Christians in the Arab world, when they pray to Allah. And when they say their prayers, they say Allah. You could talk to almost every Christian. There are some of them living in this country. And in any case, but that's what we believe in as Muslims. We believe in the same God, the compassion. So peace be upon you all, which is Assalamu alaikum in Arabic. Very important. I'm not a scholar on Islam. In fact, before 9/11, I did not speak about Islam. I didn't feel compelled that I have to speak about Islam. But after 9/11, many Muslims felt very important to speak about Islam. And I do speak about Islam. As a Muslim, I don't call myself a devout Muslim, maybe not to the same extent that I would like to be, but certainly I seek to be a more devout Muslim and a better practicing Muslim. So I do speak as the director of the Middle East Culture and Educational Services because we do think education is important. We do believe that actually education is key to acceptance. And it is acceptance, it's not tolerance. Sadly enough, many people want to tolerate others, but no, I think when you educate yourself about the other, trust me, maybe there is the acceptance, which is the best thing you could achieve and reach in terms of that. I am a human activist, whether I'm a Palestinian, whether I'm a Muslim or an American first, and I do consider myself as an American first, I am an activist. There are many issues in this country that we have to be active, and not only about Islam and all this stuff. No, there are many issues, and we have to be active and vocal about it. I go to high schools, and I tell them they need to also be activists because that's the future of this country, and the more they are well-rounded, God willing, then God help us all that, they will do a better job. Again, my premise with this is building bridges to peace. I want to ask you, how do you start building bridges to peace? And I wish the baklawa is here. How do you start building bridges to peace? Honesty. Oh, now that's going back to the previous discussions. We're all lying about our intentions. We hide our intentions. Well, I'll take that. Anybody else? Oh, well, who's killing people in Gaza?
The Israelis.
Oh, thank you. Oh, my God, my heart is broken. Thank you very much. Wow, I have an ally here, maybe. Well, thank you. We'll talk about that, maybe in the question and answer. I appreciate that. And now my biases are showing. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Understanding. Acceptance, again, that's my hope. That's my premise in terms of how we build. Next, please. And we need to go through this. This is for us in terms of Muslim diversity in Islam. And again, Muslims can look at many verses and interpret it, and there's many interpretation. But for me and the majority of the Muslims, this is what it's all about. You were created as different nations and tribes. Not that you should despise one another, but that you should know one another. That's what many Muslims believe in. As a Muslim, I can tell you that's what the majority of Muslims, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my parents, many of my friends, that's what they abide by, that's what they believe in. That's coming from a Muslim. Next, please. So to really address this, I think you have to address what are the myths and the facts. I think Dr. Kirby, I'm not sure who wrote the myth and the fact book, but I'll give you my perspective in terms of what's myth and fact. We'll talk about the basic of Islam. I think that's important. And then we'll kind of look at the factors that shape some of the images and really portrayal of Arabs and Muslims in the media. And I'll give you my bias departing words. So next, please. So what are your typical images of Muslims and Arabs in films, TV, or comic books? Be honest. Beheading, thank you. Hanging gay people, wow. Wearing the burqas. Is that your image in TV and comic books, or is that your image as you feel that's who Muslims are? Honor killing. What? Okay, I'm not arguing with you, sir. No. Women can drive. Okay. What are typical perceptions about Muslims? Are they the same as what you share? You're kind of actually confusing two things at the same time. I'm asking in TV and in the media here, and you gave me basically your perceptions. Is there any positive perception of Muslims? Are there Muslims that don't wear the burqa? Are there women that are prime ministers and engineers and doctors and professionals and so on in the Middle East or in the Arab Muslim world? In fact, there are more Muslim prime ministers in the Muslim world than here. We haven't had one yet. Maybe, I dare to say that, next election, Clinton, God, anyway. Oh, Brigitte Gabrielle, we'll get to her. Anyway, all what I can tell you is, if you go to Jordan, for example, I'm a pharmacy professor. I've been going to Jordan for so many years. There is about 12 pharmacy schools. 9 of the pharmacy schools have deans that are women. That's a very good example. That's Jordan. Well, I'll tell you another thing. When President Bush wanted to reach out to the Muslim world, he sent Karen Armstrong, one of his best speechwriters, to Saudi Arabia. And that's how we reached to these people. She went to one of the biggest hospitals in Saudi Arabia, and you know what she did? She met with about 300 women specialists wearing, some of them, the traditional thing, which is not Islamic, but anyway, that's another story. And she was preaching them about women rights. Imagine 200-300 women, they're all specialists from pediatricians to God knows what. She's preaching them about women rights. That's how we address the Muslim world. Well, if they elected to do this and they're at the highest level of that hospital, God help us in terms of how we want to reach for that Muslim world by sending somebody that doesn't have the sensitivity in terms of talking to women who are specialists in one of the top hospitals, King Faisal or King Saud Hospital, and addressing them as if they're, oh my God, you know, give me my right. Wow. That's how sensitive we are in terms of dealing with that part of the world. And that's Saudi Arabia, by the way. If you just said Jordan, well, that's Jordan because King Hussein is a moderate, you know, so we better be nice about King Hussein because he's a moderate. Doesn't mean there are many horrific things happening in Saudi Arabia, and many Muslims don't agree with them, including the issue about women driving. Well, guess what? At the time of the Prophet, there were no cars. There were many other things that did not exist. But sadly enough, interpretation varies between Muslim scholars. And in Saudi Arabia, they're dumb enough to accept that women cannot drive now. But that doesn't mean that there is not a moral issue in terms of why they decided on that. So if you look at that particular fatwa in terms of why, there is issues of morality, there is issues of preventing teenagers going out, and sadly having some of the issues we have here in this country because they have certain freedoms. So they wanted to control that, whether you like that or not, that's an issue. But there are other interpretations why women don't drive rather than it's Islam, period. So you have to think beyond that. And certainly there are a lot of morality issues that many of us will agree maybe would come with women driving, whether it's right or not, but you have to explain what the reason is. So in any case, do you guys know any Arab or Muslim? Arab or Muslim? Good people? Oh, that's why they're good people. They were converted to Christianity. Well, God bless them all. Actually, you know, when I read about Dr. Christian, my thought is somebody that spent 10 years spiritual wandering, then they found Christianity, has a beautiful story to tell. Beautiful story when you think about it. But sadly enough for me, reading his website or thinking in terms of what happened in terms of that conversion, I wish he spends maybe 50% of his time talking about the beauty of Christianity and why he did, as much as he talks about the threat of Muslims in this country or in Omaha, because the story to be told with these people is really the beauty of why he converted to Christianity rather than spending any energy on destroying his birth religion. I'm sorry I'm attacking you, but you'll have time maybe to address that sometime, I guess. Next, please. So, myths and fact, let's go through this quickly. Hurry up, let's go. All Arabs are Muslims, true or false? So what's the answer? So tell me what's the true answer. All Arabs are Muslims, so what's the answer? All of them are not. So what are they? So what's the rest? What's the rest? What are they? There's about 20% of Arabs that are Christians. They're the original Christians. In fact, that's one of the saddest things about the friction between this part of the world and that part of the world, because the chasm that happened between the Western church and the Eastern church did not help us as Arabs and even as Muslims, because those people existed there, talking about coexistence between Muslims and Christians and Jews. They've been there since the time of Jesus. If Islam wasn't the true religion in terms of respecting the people of the book, these people would never have existed there. 50% of the population of Lebanon are Christians. In Palestine, it used to be 20% up till, sadly, we had these Zionists that came and destroyed the fabric of that society, which including many Palestinian Jews that still live there and consider themselves Palestinians. Okay? All right? I know I'm being passionate about this, but guess what? If you don't have convictions and you don't live by them, and if you don't speak them, I don't know why you live. Anyway, so 20% of that people are actually Christians and some are Jews. All Muslims are Arabs? Yes, sir. What do I classify Christians? They're Arab Christians. Many of them are from the Eastern Church. Some of them are Catholic. How many of you visited Jerusalem? Oh, Jerusalem. The Holy Land, Jerusalem. How many of you visited? How should I say Jerusalem? What's wrong with Jerusalem? I mean, is it the accent? Anyway, I mean, it is the most beautiful thing. I spent 6 hours touring the old city last year, and it's still in my heart. It's painful as much as it is, because the sign of occupation is still there in every aspect you do as a Palestinian, but it's still the most beautiful city because it is the symbol of what should happen. Christianity, Judaism, and yes, Jews. There are Jews there that are opposing of the Israeli government and its policies and attempting to Judaize just Jerusalem for the Jews. In fact, the whole Zionist ideology is creating an exclusive Jewish homeland. Well, guess what? If they're going to do that, they're going to expel every Christian and Muslim, and the ethnic cleansing that is going on in Palestine, including the war on Gaza, is really a very good example in terms of the attempt of not Jews, Zionist Jews that are trying to do what they're doing in Palestine. Yes, ma'am. Wow, it's amazing how when I'm talking, everybody wants to ask their question. Nobody attempted. But go ahead, please. What the heck? Yes, ma'am. Sure. Oh. Ouch. Hey, did you hear the question? Do I need to repeat it? Well, guess what, guys? I have an F-16 and F-22, some of the most sophisticated weapons in the world, and I'm giving you 1 minute to clear, or I'm going to bomb the heck out of this place. Well, let me just say that. Let me tell you, no, I want to answer that. Let me tell you, let me tell you this. Hamas have fired 45,000 rockets against Israel since 2005. You know how many civilians were killed? How many civilians? Oh, wow, that's amazing. Well, I tell you what, 10, sadly, Israeli civilians were killed. Let me tell you what happened in Gaza over the last month. Over the last month, 2,000 Palestinians were killed. Well, you know what? I better get back to my presentation because we better, it's war, yes. I'm sorry, Scott, you're right. I shouldn't have addressed questions. Let me go with my presentation because I could go back. Even though I think sometimes the best thing is the question and answer with the audience, and maybe that's why. No, that's okay.
Please, everyone refrain from shouting out questions or interacting with the host and the guest until we get to that portion. And one thing I just want to say, you know, it takes some guts to come into a room that you know is not going to be favorable to your views. Dr. Alsharif is doing what he came here to do, and that is to present his views and his point of view. It is our job to listen to that, learn from it, and then challenge it. As I told him, he would be challenged tonight, but let's do it in a respectful way through the timing of this event. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, and again, my mistake trying to engage, maybe I shouldn't have, and let's try to do as much of this. So, Muslims, Arabs are dark skinned. Obviously not. Look at my wife, she is a true terrorist Palestinian, I'll tell you that. All right, my son, that's my brother, by the way, and that's my best soccer player on my under 13, Nader. Anyway, my nephew. Islam preaches holy war. Be honest. Yes, no? All right, some yes, some no. Well, go on. Go on, please, please, quickly. Next, please. That's my daughter, Melina, 2 years of age. She's not here. She's a competitive dancer, but anyway, she does look like a terrorist too, so next, please. So let me just really quick basics of Islam. Next, please. Islam, the word Islam comes from the word silm in Arabic. Silm means peace. For us as Muslims, if we just think about what this religion is, and it's the word silm, if you think about any violence, it doesn't mean anything in terms of what this religion name is, because it comes from the word silm, okay? We believe, Muslims believe, that it is a continuum of the teachings of Christianity and Judaism. In fact, God forbid, we believe in this country, when we talk about Judeo-Christian, that it's actually part of a Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions, because everything that Christians and Jews believe in, we believe in. We believe. That's the teachings I got in high school, in kindergarten, in every aspect of my teaching, and that's the teachings that the majority of Muslims get. Yes, there is madrasas in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia that sadly have some extremist ideology, same thing we have in this country. There are extremist Christians in this country that advocate certain ideologies that don't have anything to do with Christianity. Sadly enough, we have some churches here, and I'm not going to tell you where those churches are, that quote from the prophecies and so on for Armageddon and other aspects, what should happen in that part of the world, and it's all about violence. So it's not unique to Islam. There is no doubt about it. I'm not here to tell you we don't have Muslims that are extremists, that are horrific. In fact, I call the 9/11 hijackers subhumans. They're not humans. There's nothing in terms of what they've done. And by the way, it's not me. If you go some of the organizations that Mark and others kind of attack, whether it's CARE or ESNA, there are fatwas after fatwas and condemnations of 9/11 and almost every act of violence. But I guess in the perception of many, it's like they're cheating. They're just saying it for consumer consumption or whatever. All right? So that's what we believe in. Yes, Muslims, the same as Christians and Jews, believe that Islam is a way of life for them. It's a way of life. If you don't believe in your religion, then you cannot accept it as your way of life. So when it is a way of life, then you need to live it to be a practicing Muslim. Muslims believe that they have to submit God. Again, Muslims believe it's the same God as Christians and Jews. We name it. If you talk about in Judaism, what do they call God? Is it God? Yeah, thank you. How do you say it in Spanish? Thank you. Who said it? God, what is the baklava? Yes. Yes. So anyway, in fact, in Aramaic, which is the language of Jesus, it is Allahu, which is similar to the word in Arabic. All right? Islamic relates to actions. It's like with any religion. Go to the next slide, please. How are we doing on time? We're good? So like with any religion, it is about beliefs and about practices. So when you look at about the beliefs, next slide, please. It's the belief in one God. It's the belief in angels. Gabriel is one of the most prominent angels in Islam, and he is the one that revealed that message to the Prophet Muhammad. Muslims actually believe there is an angel on both shoulders. The one on the right shoulder writes all your good deeds. The one on the left shoulder writes all your bad deeds. So you want to make sure you're walking like this all the time. You'll be in good shape there, okay? Back, please. Prophets. There are 25 prophets that are mentioned from the Quran, in the Quran, including starting from Abraham, because and even Adam is considered in that status. And again, I'm not a scholar in Islam, but that is the basics of what Islam is. Virgin Mary is considered a prophet in the eyes of many, and she's revered in many ways. There is a whole chapter in the Quran about the Virgin Mary. The holy books, yes, and I agree with our previous speakers. Muslims do believe in the Torah, the Bible, and all the scrolls and so on, but yes, Muslims do believe that there has been deviation or variations on what was written originally. That is a fact, and any Muslim will tell you that. We are taught that, yes, there has been deviations in those religions in terms of the original message, the way it came to the different prophets of these religions. Muslims believe in the Day of Judgment. Next, please. In terms of the pillars, I mean, if you look at the pillars of any religion, they're exactly the same. And that's really where many Muslims that are of good conscience, and many Christians and Jews, and I'm no longer on the Tri-Faith board, but yes, all these good people do believe in terms of the commonalities among all of us. The commonalities among all of us. And if we want to truly take a journey and bridge to peace, we start with what is common between us rather than what makes us different. That's where we get in trouble, and that's where we get extremists from all sides, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, that promote the differences, and sadly enough makes them. That's what the mainstream of all our religions believe in, and then we're all in trouble because we're giving them the microphone rather than people that have at least some common sense to say we share one humanity. And God, when he looks at a face, does not distinguish whether they're Christian, Jew, they're a human being, and that's a human being that was created in his image, or her image, dare I say that. All right? Anyway. So, declaration of faith. Every religion, you have to declare your faith to your Creator. And that's what Muslims have to start with. Prayer 5 times a day. That's what Muslims. And if you want to tell me a religion that advocates for its people to pray 5 times a day and to discipline themselves and to really reach out and have a good relation with God. In fact, in Islam, it is a relationship between you and God. And there is no intermediates, there is no pope, there is no sheikh, there is no imam. It is a relation, so he only knows what's inside you, nobody else. So I cannot tell you what's inside of, yes, 1.8 billion Muslims, but nobody can claim they can. Or just a blank check, all Christians or all Muslims or Jews are like that. Some of my best friends are Jews, despite of my opinions about the state of Israel and what it does to my people in Palestine. All right, another story. Fasting in Ramadan. Muslims go, yes, to extreme. We fast for a whole month from sunrise to sunset. But if you look about Christianity, Judaism, there's many aspects of that fasting, whether it's Lent, or whatever. But we fast from sunrise, sunset, no food, no drink. And again, a religion that advocates something like this, to feel with the hungry, to give money to the poor, to celebrate what you have, to every single night you sit at that table, you say, let's not eat in excess, at least for that month. I don't know how can that religion tell you we're extremists. I mean, I fight with him every single time, and he fasted for the first year, this year. And, well, I don't like this. Don't, Mom, cook something. I say, no. The whole point of this is the month of Ramadan, and you need to eat what's on the table, because that's the message of that month. Charity, much better than Uncle Sam, 2%. But it's to give to the poor. Pilgrimage to Mecca. How many of you have been to the Vatican? all right? Holy Land, okay? For Muslims, they go once in their lifetime to Mecca. When do you hear about Mecca and the pilgrimage in the news? Not much, or when? The Omaha World Herald, God bless him, my brother works for the Omaha World Herald, but I better be careful here. He's their system analyst. When do you hear about, well, sadly enough, it seems every time there is a stampede or fire. But guess what? 2 million people, men and women alike, dress in white, and they go to pray and to remember the story of the prophet Abraham and the struggles he had with his family for almost 2 weeks. And you want to tell me these 2 million people are terrorists or have some hidden agenda? Some of them are 70, 80 years of age, barely can walk, some of them on wheelchairs, and they have to be pushed. And they go and do that pilgrimage. And God tells them, if you're not physically capable of doing this, don't do it. Send somebody else if you have the money. But they still do it. They still do it. Those are the people you need to hear about. In fact, if I have time, I have about 400 pictures of the Arab world and the Muslim world that you all should look at. Because the images, yes, they're negative images, but I can show you some unbelievable pictures of ordinary people that you will relate to in a way that these are other human beings that you have to relate to, period. Regardless whether they're Muslims, Christians, Jews, they're other human beings you relate to. Human life is sacred for everybody, for everybody. And when we see suffering, we have to really admit that it should not happen for everybody, period. So, references, yes, it was mentioned that Muslims refer to the Holy Quran. That's their first reference because they believe it's the word of God. Second thing is the hadith, which is the prophet's sayings. And the third thing, and I started kind of very much interested over the last few years with Islamic jurisprudence. Because again, as a scientist, and I look at the process of Islamic jurisprudence, it's amazing. I'm in the healthcare system. For the Islamic scientists to decide on, for example, organ transplantation, it is a beautiful process in terms of, again, looking at what God tells us. What does the prophet tell us? Do you guys do this as Christians? Isn't that what we all do? That's what we all do in our, what does God tell us about these issues? Is that right? Is that wrong? What are the ethical issues, moral issues, and so on? Are we against God by doing this, and so on? Organ transplantation or donation. So you have scholars that tell you, wait a second, how could you give something that is not yours? Because your body belongs to God. Then you have scholars that say, well, wait a second, you're saving a life. And God says if you save one human life, as if you save the whole mankind. So again, it is a struggle. It's a strive to find the best answer in terms of our daily living. Next, please. Oh, the other thing I want to mention here, which is very important for all of us. You have to differentiate between what is the religion and what is culture. So yes, I could argue with Dr. I apologize, is it Klasov? Thank you. I could argue in terms of saying, well, yeah, there are people that interpret certain things in a very negative way, but there are hundreds of thousands that interpret it in the most positive way. And I'm not a scholar to take every verse that was explained here and go through it, but I can tell you there are scholars that will take it and explain it to you in the most beautiful way and within the context of when it happened almost 2,000 years ago. If you want to interpret the Bible, the Torah, the gospel, within the context of what happened 2,000 years ago, God help us all. Because things are different. The context is different. When Muslims were trying, whichever way you want to think about, to spread Islam, they were under a lot of threat from non-believers, not even Christians or Jews. And when God said what he said, it is, as it's explained, to spread fear in the heart of the non-believers. So when you see slew them and kill them and this, it is within that context. And that is present in every scripture. Christianity, Judaism, and there are horrific things even in some of these verses in the other scriptures. The same thing as in Islam, if you want to just interpret it the way it is interpreted without the context. Skip through this. There's 1.8 billion Muslims. There's about 350 million Arabs. About 80% are Muslims. How many in the United States? Ooh, that's the enemy within. How many in the United States? About 5 to 7 million people. You don't get a baklava because you get it all the time. It's always at my house. So, about 7. Next, please. There's about 5,000 to 7,000 in Nebraska, all right? Islam is expected to kind of bypass Judaism and other, it'll be the second. You look at the numbers in Nebraska, the businesses, doctors, engineers, and so on. Next, please. So, real quick, I know I've taken too much time. How are we doing? Oh my God, I'm in trouble. All right, these are really key things, and I'm going to go through these real quickly. If we want to establish a new reality between any group of people, you have to listen to what these people think in terms of how their perception is being somewhat distorted, period. Historical. Go next, please, real quick. Biblical accounts. Well, guess what? If there is no Islam, there will be 1.8 billion Muslims that are either Christians or Jews. It's a simple fact. So certainly that by itself is a point of conflict. We all have to agree on that, right? And some people think that should not have happened. But Islam came. Muslims believe that it's a continuum. Muslim has a message that they believe from God, the same God as the God of Christians and Jews. And they built an empire. That empire accomplished a lot, scientifically, economically, all aspects of life, physics, language, you name it. And it protected Christians and Jews, even up till the Ottoman Empire was in Spain. And when the Christians targeted the Jews, the savior of the Jews was the Muslim empire that brought them into Turkey, North Africa, Palestine, you name it. So again, to talk about Islam does not coexist with these communities. We lived in Palestine. I was born in Palestine. My grandmother, great-grandmother, my parents lived there in Jerusalem. And they live with Jews, Christians. In fact, nobody even spoke who's Christian or Muslim or Kurdish or Shia or Sunni. That's where the politics play. That's where Christian Zionists, with all due respect, come. That's where Zionists themselves come and play the political game on us as people of God, okay? So the key thing with that accomplishment of the Islamic empire is completely ignored. The chasm between Eastern and Western church is a major one. And it wasn't until 1960, and I believe it was Pope VI, I think, when he came to Jerusalem and met with the Eastern church leaders, that's when they started talking. But that's important because there are Christian Muslims, yes, that are being targeted by Muslims. They're being targeted now in Iraq, and the gentleman spoke about what's happened with ISIL. The Prophet himself spoke about days when Arabs in their black skin will come and pretend they're the savior of Islam. So we were warned about these thugs, subhumans that are doing these horrific things in Iraq. And that's nothing has to do with Islam whatsoever. The Orientalist view, do you know what I'm talking about here? Yes, that's the image of that part of the world. That's the imperialist, colonialist image of that part of the world. That's what the Christian Zionists and the Jews that came, the Zionists, saying, well, Palestine is a land without people for a people without the land. If you have time, I'll show the pictures of my great-grandmother, grandparents, mom, everybody living in Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Haifa, and trust me, they were living as prosperous as any thousands of other Palestinian families, and it wasn't a land without people for a people without a land. The Orientalist view is a major one. How many of you know Edward Said? He's a Palestinian scholar and wonderful work, and he talked about Orientalism. And if you have time, read his book about Orientalism, and many others wrote about that. But it's not only about the Arabs. It's about the Chinese. It's about every part of that world when the British Empire controlled and fantasized with that word to sadly somewhat justify its crimes in those countries, whether it's Pakistan, India, or other parts, because that's what colonial powers do. Sadly enough, that's what we've done in this country. When we came to this country as settlers, we talk about the Native Americans, savages, barbaric. and all these horrific images to justify, yeah, well, we can go in and just destroy them, take their culture and prevent them from experiencing or using their language and so on. Some of you might disagree, but sadly enough, what I feel, that's what happened. But that exists in every colonial era. We've accomplished great things in this country that we are proud of, no doubt about it. But we cannot forget what happened to the natives. As a Palestinian, I say the same thing about what happens in Palestine. Israel is a great country, they've accomplished great things, but up till they do justice for the Palestinian people, up till they do justice, and that means to accept their moral and legal responsibility for what they did to my great-grandparents, parents, and everybody in that part of it, yes, we will have peace. All this nonsense about wars and committing, all that stuff, I'm sorry, it's not gonna cut it. Next, please. I know it's the clash of civilization, 9/11, the whole concept with all of this is the demonization and dehumanization of the Muslims and Arabs. It sounds very simple, but sadly, that's what justifies really how things are going. Next, please. Islamophobia is a major thing. It is ripe and sadly prosperous. It's coming here in Omaha, sadly. I think the attack about the tri-faith is unjustified. Certainly, those verses can be discussed. But in any way, to really put doubt on the good people that are doing this, whether they're Christians and Jews or Muslims, is very unfortunate. Next, please. And, you know, David Horowitz, I know of David Horowitz very well. And, oh, well, good for you. Robert Spencer, he came here. Mark, thanks for God. You know, Mark brought him here. So a lot of these people, Daniel Pipes targets us as educators and so on. So very unfortunate, but that whole history is there. Next, please. American popular media, again, there is no positive image of Arabs and Muslims. In fact, every culture in this country have been targeted by Hollywood. The worst culprit is Disney. That is the most horrific thing. Every culture, Jews, Christians, you name it, have been targeted by Disney. Professor Jack Shaheen, we brought him to Creighton University twice. And I asked him, I want you to shock the people there. And he brought a video from a cartoon in the 1960s. And the cartoon was two monkeys and an African-American kid in the middle. And whatever the monkeys did to the song, the African-American kid did. How sinister, how horrific. How horrific, and this is from Disney. And guess what? There are Disney cartoons that have the yarmulke wearing rabbi with the dollar sign in his eye. Every ethnic religious group has been targeted, and sadly enough, Arabs and Muslims are a free game now for Disney and other movies. Next, please, quickly, please. The education system, I will give you an example. I sit on the OPS and we look at books, adoption of books. In math, when you talk about adoption of books for math, when you have a case about math and then the company CEO is John Anderson, but the janitor is Mr. Hernandez. You know, there are so many subtle things in terms of how our culture sadly perpetuates certain stereotypes. Even in math books for kids. And I'm not going to give you the examples about Arabs and Muslims in some of these books. Next, please. American politics. That's maybe where the questions and answers come. But if you look at this, these are the key words: the oil interests, the support of ruling regimes, the support of Israel, 9/11, military bases, Iraq wars, war on terrorism, local and national politics, attack on civil liberties, and yes, sadly, anti-Americanism here in this country, yes, with some people that have been radicalized, not only Muslims, trust me, there are many other groups that hate our government based on what they think is doing wrong. It's not only Muslims. In fact, some of these militias and so on, and even after the election, I know I apologize, but give me 2 minutes. 2 minutes, I'll go through this real quick. So, next, really, please. Iran and Iraq, many issues there. Many people don't know that we slept, excuse me, the expression, in bed with Saddam Hussein for many years. And then look what we did in Iraq. And talk about the liberation of Iraq, wow. I will tell you this, if you take a survey now in Iraq, they will tell you, we'll take Saddam Hussein anytime for what's happening now. Isn't that a sad thing? Any time they will take Saddam Hussein back for what's happening now. Iran, That's a complete, I mean, the support of the Shah, the most extremist regime in the world. And to hear the gentleman say, wow, Carter allowed that to happen? Oh, I mean, what a horrific human right. You name it, massacring his people. Saddam, a different story, but the Shah, he was our man. So it's okay that he continued and keep him there. Next, please, real quick. Political Islam, it's a major issue. There are Muslims that call themselves Islamists, and they want to live in their countries as a way of life for them. That should be accepted. If they win elections, they should be acknowledged and accepted, part of an election that is democratic. What happened in Egypt? What happened in Gaza and Palestine? They won their elections democratically and even by support from our government. And then when they win, we're not going to accept that. If you think about what happened in Eastern Europe, and how Eastern Europe moved to democracy. How come the Arab Muslim world cannot get the same way that happened in Europe? Is it inherent in them that they cannot be democratic like some people advocate? I'm sorry, no. There are many other issues involved in terms of why. Why? Because we antagonize, we put suspicion, we support the extremists, and guess what? Yes, these ISIL and so on, we do create some of that chaos. And it's not only liberals that do that. Trust me. It is also conservatives that advocate chaos in that part of the world to maintain the status quo and control. Liberation movement, Hamas and Hezbollah, that's another story. I do apologize. This is not a way that I wanted. I really wanted to kind of finish this and give you a chance. My apologies. But we'll do this more in the question and answer. Thank you very much. My apologies.